Hi, so in this video we'll talk about resistant starches because I see many people who think they are doing the good thing by eating cold potatoes or cold rice because they have heard that it's healthier to do so, but it actually depends on your health issues, it depends on the health of your digestive system, it depends what is your goal. So we will talk about that. Actually, for most of my clients, it's not a good idea to eat resistant starches. So it's not a good idea to eat the potatoes cold or the rice cold or the pastas cold. So we will see that today in this video. Here are my sources. Here are a few studies that I used to make this video. I will put the link under this video so you can check the sources yourself. So what are resistant starches? So most people have heard about resistant starches that are in cold potatoes or cold rice, but actually it's not only in potatoes or rice, it's in anything that has starches. It's also in legumes, in all grains, and in all tubers. So what is the definition of resistant starch? Here you have the definition. Resistant starch pass undegraded through the digestive system to the colon, where they are fermented by bacteria to produce short-chain fatty acids. Here you have another definition. Resistant starch is defined as starch and starch degradation products that resist the action of amylolytic enzymes. So there are different types of resistant starches. Here we see resistant starch 1, 2, 3, 4. Here it goes till 5. So basically resistant starch 1, type 1, it's physically inaccessible to digestion by entrapment in a non-digestible matrix. That is the case for legumes such as beans and lentils. Resistant starch number 2, it's ungelatinized starch. That's what you will find in raw potatoes or unripe bananas. They stay in the structure of the starch is crystalline, that make them not available to the digestion. Number 3, it's retrograded starch. That's the main type of starch we will talk about today. That's when you cook pasta, potato, rice or whatever, and then you let it cool. Okay, so retrograded starch forms after cooked gelatinized starch cools. For example, cooked and cooled potatoes or pasta. And then number 4 and 5, we won't really talk about them today. So here you have it. This is what is resistant starch. So the ratio amylose-amylopectin is very important to understand why resistant starch type 3 work the way they do. So here in this study they say significant positive correlations were observed between the resistant starch content and amylose. The amylose-amylopectin ratio determines how much retrograded starch remains on reheating, with retrograded amylose being more heat stable than retrograded amylopectin. Okay, so amylose is more heat stable compared to amylopectin. That means that if your starchy food has more amylose compared to amylopectin, if you cool it, you will have more resistant starch, but if you reheat it, it won't go back to its initial state of very few resistant starch. It will stay mostly as its state after it was cooled down. Whereas if you have more amylopectin compared to amylose, if you cook it, then refrigerate it and then reheat it, it will get almost back to what it was in the first state. For example, in contrast to rice, reheating boiled potatoes reduces resistant starch content almost to that observed in freshly cooked potatoes. This may be explained by differences in amylose-amylopectin ratio, as rice has a higher amylose-amylopectin ratio than potato, which has a ratio ranging from 20 to 80. So for rice, you see here, there's more amylose, 33, compared to potatoes, where it's only 20. And in rice, there's less amylopectin, 67 here, compared to potatoes, 80. Okay, so it means that if you want more resistant starch, For example, if you don't like eating your rice or your potatoes cold, but you still want resistant starch, so you cook them, um, you put them in the fridge, you let it cool, and then you want to reheat it. If you do that with rice, it's fine because you will still have lots of resistant starch even if you reheat it. But if you reheat the potatoes, most of the resistant starch will be back to non-resistant starch. So how much resistant starch in potatoes? As we saw, the starch in potatoes is generally 70-80% amylopectin, with the remainder being amylose. That's what we just saw right here, right before. When potatoes are chilled, they form retrograde starch, which is not available for digestion in the small intestine. And here they show that when you cook potatoes, so baked potatoes compared to boiled potatoes, so baked potatoes have more resistant starch than boiled potatoes. And here, chilled potatoes has more resistant starch than either hot or reheated potatoes. So baked potatoes has more resistant starch compared to boiled potatoes, and chilled boiled potatoes have more resistant starch than reheated potatoes that have more resistant starch than hot potatoes. Okay? Cold storage of boiled potatoes increased resistant starch content significantly from 3.3% to 5.2%. Yeah, and compared to raw potatoes, you have a six-fold increase in digestibility of the starch in boiled potatoes compared to raw potatoes, and in grilled potatoes you have a five-fold increase of digestibility compared to raw potatoes. What about resistant starch in rice? So cooling produces changes in rapidly digested starch and slow digested starch, with white rice displaying a reduction in rapidly digested starch along with an increase in slow digested starch and resistant starch after 10-hour cold storage. Reheating to 65 degrees reversed about 20% of the effect of cold storage, with increases in RDS and SDS observed. So basically here it says what we said before. So you cook your rice and then you let it cool, you have more resistant starch, and then if you reheat it, some of the resistant starch becomes digestible starch, but it's only 20%. It's not a lot compared to what it does when you do that with potatoes. And there's more resistant starch if you cook the rice with oil. For example, you boil your rice and then you stir fried this rice with oil and then you let it cool. This cooled rice that was cooked with oil will have more resistant starch compared to only boiled rice that you let it cool. So there's a cumulative effect of cold storage and oil. And here they calculate the amount of resistant starch in rice. So freshly cooked white rice has 0.64 grams of resistant starch for 100 grams. Cooked white rice that was cooled for 10 hours at room temperature has 1.30 grams of resistant starch, and cooked white rice that was cooled for 24 hours, so much longer, and at 4 degrees Celsius, then reheated, has a little more resistant starch, 1.65. That can be explained. So the difference between those two is not huge. That can be explained because they reheated the rice, and as we saw before, a part of the resistant starch become digestible starch when you reheat the rice. Cooling of cooked white rice increased resistant starch content. What about resistant starch in grains, legumes, and sweet potatoes? So this is a study about that. The mean resistant starch content of the freshly cooked legumes, cereals, and tubers, 4.18% for legumes. That's really high, and that's why most people cannot digest legumes. That's why eating legumes gives lots of gas and bloating to many people. It's because it's very rich in undigestible fiber and undigestible resistant starch. 4.18% for legumes, 1.86% of resistant starch for cereals, for grains, and 1.51% for tubers. And after they cool it and reheat it several times, it increased to 8.16% for the legumes, so almost doubled, 3.25% for grains, and 2.51% for the tubers, with a maximum increase of 114% in pea and minimum of 62% in sweet potatoes. So what are the effects of resistant starches on the gut? So as we explained before, resistant starches are just like another type of fiber. It's a type of fiber, meaning that it is not digestible by our digestive system. We are not herbivores. We cannot digest and have nutrients from the digestion of fiber, because by definition a fiber is not digestible. So anyway, so resistant starch are like fiber. It means that it's not absorbed in the small intestine, but instead it passes to the large intestine, where it gets fermented by the bacteria. Resistant starch is a type of fermentable fiber, and it's therefore a type of prebiotic. That means it's food for bacteria living in the large intestine. And as we know, when bacteria in the colon eat fiber or resistant starch, they produce short chain fatty acids that are very good for your colon health, for the health of your gut. And it reduces the pH in the large intestine, because short chain fatty acids are acids, so it will lower the pH, and you are supposed to have a colon with a slightly acidic pH. So basically that's what it does. Resistant starch brings more food to the bacteria in your colon, and therefore they make short chain fatty acids, like the most famous one is butyrate, that is very good for your intestinal health. What are the effects of resistant starch on glycemia? In human subjects, insulin sensitivity is increased with the feeding of resistant starch. So basically, with everything we said before, it just makes sense. When you eat resistant starch, as we said, it's not something that you can digest. So when you eat cold potatoes or cold rice or cold pasta, a large part of the starch is not digestible, so it won't get absorbed into your digestive system, and therefore it won't get transformed into sugars that will pass in your bloodstream. So if you have glycemic issues, we will talk about that in 1 second, but then yeah, if you eat resistant starch, if you eat cold potatoes, you won't have as much glycemia compared to hot potatoes. So in conclusion, are resistant starch beneficial or not? It depends on your health situation. If you have lots of bloating, gas, dysbiosis, excess fermentation, then the answer is no, it's not beneficial for you. Because as we said, it's like a fiber. It's something that you cannot digest, and that's something that will feed your bacteria. So if you already have too much bloating, too much gas, too much fermentation, it will add up. You know, if you eat resistant starch, you will have more bloating, more gas, more fermentation, because you will feed even more your bad bacteria, your dysbiosis. So you will aggravate your intestinal health. If you have constipation, it depends. Lots of people who have chronic constipation, very bad chronic constipation for years, their issue is that mainly they have kind of a paralysis of their intestine. So if they eat fiber on a paralyzed intestine, it will aggravate the constipation, because it's like you have a pipe and there's a blockage in the pipe, and on that blockage you add more blockage, with the fiber. It won't help. It will just make your constipation worse. So for most people who have this type of constipation, it won't be good for them to eat more fiber or to eat more resistant starch. If you have another type of constipation where your colon is not paralyzed, you still have peristaltism, then yes, eating more fiber can help, because fiber will irritate your colon, and that will make the muscles of your colon work more to get rid of this irritating thing. Okay, so it depends the type of constipation you have. More details on my constipation video that I put in the comment under the video. If you have diabetes, is it good or not to eat resistant starch? As we saw before, yes, it is. So if you have diabetes, it's better that you eat your potatoes, your pasta or your rice cold. Don't eat them right after cooking. No, you want to eat them cold. Therefore, you won't absorb the sugars in them. If you want to lose weight, yes, resistant starch are better. So it's the same principle. If you don't want to get energy from your food, because that's basically what it is, to lose weight, then yes, you want to consume your potatoes cold rather than hot, okay, because you won't be able to digest some part of it. If you want to gain weight, it's the opposite. You don't want to eat resistant starch, you want to eat freshly cooked hot potatoes, rice and pasta. If you want more prebiotics, yes, eat more resistant starch, because we saw that resistant starch are not digestible for you. They go straight to your colon where they feed your bacteria, and therefore that's prebiotics for your bacteria. If you have a good microbiome, a good microbiome balance, then it will be good for you. But as we saw in point number 1 on this slide, if you don't have a good bacterial balance, if you have dysbiosis, then it won't be a good idea. It all depends. Prebiotics on a healthy gut microbiome is great. Prebiotics on an unhealthy gut microbiome is bad. That's all. That's all for today. I hope you liked this video. If you want my course on how to heal your gut naturally, I will put the link of my course under this video. It's on my website, thecandidaslayer.com. I see you in the next video. Bye bye.